and welcome to lectionaryq. I'm Dennis Sanders, your host. I am the pastor of First Christian Church Disciples of Christ in Roseville, Minnesota. The Q stands for questions, because that's what we do here every week. We take one of the scriptures from the Revised Common Lectionary for the upcoming Sunday, and we ask questions. We also have a reflection in there that kind of helps for people to understand the text. The whole point of this podcast is a way for pastors to prepare for their Sunday sermons, but I also hope it's for people who aren't pastors, people who maybe want this as a time during the week when they can step away from the busyness of the world and just kind of have a time for silence and solitude. And also for those who maybe are not pastors but are leading Bible studies. And either way, it's a good way of reflecting on what God is saying to us. So these are the questions and reflections for this coming Sunday, February 11th, 2024, which is Transfiguration Sunday. We're going to be looking at Mark 9, verses 2 through 9. But I do want to suggest that you might actually want to look at Mark 8, 38 through 9:1, because I think that helps understand some of the background of the text that we're reading today. So now I'm going to go ahead and read the reflection. The reflection for this week is entitled, Listen with Your Eyes. So if you were to look at me, you may not know that I have a problem with reading. It's not that I can't read. In fact, I can, and I love to read. But reading has been a challenge for as long as I can remember. And it's not because I have dyslexia, but I can remember trying to read novels like The Heart of Darkness or Huckleberry Finn, and just having a hard time getting through them. Somehow I was able to get through college and seminary, but that problem still remained. I could see the words, I knew what they meant, but ask me about the meaning of what I just read, and sometimes you would get a blank stare. I've learned over time that I have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or as they commonly call it, ADHD. I believe I had it for a while, but that was confirmed recently, along with also a diagnosis of Asperger's. And I've come to learn that ADHD can affect reading comprehension. I'm always so distracted that it can be hard to keep my attention on reading. A few months ago, a while back actually, I decided that I was going to start purchasing audio versions of books that I wanted to read. And that really helped. Suddenly things became clear. The ability to listen to a book allowed me to understand in a way that I haven't always been able to do when I'm reading a book. So sometimes, instead of slogging through reading a book, I can now listen to the written word and understand it. The story today about the Transfiguration of Jesus has always been an interesting one to me, but I've had a hard time understanding this event. And maybe you do too, because what was its purpose? What's its meaning? When Jesus, along with Peter, James, and John, are on that mountain, they hear a voice that tells them to listen to Jesus. Why does the voice say that? It really helps to look at the end of chapter 8. Jesus asks his disciples who the people say he is, and Peter answers. But Jesus isn't immediately satisfied. So he asks again, who do you say that I am? And Peter responds by saying that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God. Then Jesus then tells his disciples that he's going to go through a period of suffering, and that's going to result in his death. He will be raised again, but he's still going to die. Peter didn't understand this whole resurrection thing, but he did understand the whole dying part. When he tells Jesus that this won't happen, Jesus quickly silences Peter. Now, here they are on top of this mountain. And Peter, James, and John see Jesus in a way that they've never seen him before. And Peter doesn't get this. He says something just to say something because he doesn't know what to say. And then there's this voice, probably the voice of God, that comes in the form of a cloud and says to the three disciples to listen to Jesus. When God is telling the disciples to listen to Jesus, God isn't saying for Peter to just use his ears. Instead, God calls Peter to pay attention. Pay attention to Jesus. Watch what he does, who he cares about, what he says. If you want to understand Jesus, pay attention. This is what Lent is all about, paying attention to Jesus. Peter's problem, and ours as well, is that we aren't always paying attention. Sure, the disciples like Peter and we too have ideas about Jesus, but we don't always get Jesus. And God calls them on this. God tells the disciples, and by extension us, to pay attention. Pay attention to the clues that are given that reveal who Jesus is. Throughout the season of Lent, we see those clues, and they lead all the way to Jesus hanging on a cross on Good Friday. Lent can be a time to get rid of some distractions, to focus on Jesus and pay attention. Because if we pay attention, we will see Christ revealed as we draw closer and closer to the cross. When I was able to hear the words instead of always trying to read them, things started to become clear. Transfiguration calls us to open our eyes, our hearts, our minds, so that we can see the Son of God clearly. So here are the questions for this week. Number 1, how would you describe the Transfiguration in your own words? Do you think you could do it? Number 2, why do you think that Peter spoke up when Jesus was transfigured, as he saw him sitting with Elijah and Moses? And finally, number 3, short questions this week. What role does beauty have in the life of faith? And more specifically, is the Transfiguration considered beautiful? So, what are your questions? And what are your answers? If you are brave or would like to do that, drop me a line. You can send me an email at lectionaryq, all one word, at substack.com. So that's it for lectionaryq. But before I go, just a reminder that I do have another podcast that I do called Church in Maine. It's a religion and public affairs broadcast. It's kind of where those two intersect. Being that this is an election year, I'm trying to focus a little bit more on the role of faith in the life of the church. And so, the role of politics in the life of the church. What does it mean to be faithful Christians, especially during an election year? So I'm trying to hopefully get more guests that we can talk to about the role of faith in politics. If you're interested to listen to that podcast, please go to churchandmaine, all one word, .org. And Maine is as in Main Street, where you can listen to the podcast. I also will sometimes occasionally, I also have a Substack where I put some articles in there that are related to the topics in the podcast. And you can find that at churchandmaine, all one word, .substack.com. If you'd like to subscribe to lectionaryq, that is also on Substack at lectionaryq, all one word, .substack.com. And then you can, if you subscribe, you can receive the latest episode in your email inbox. Again, that is it for lectionaryq. I'm Dennis Sanders, your host. Take care, everyone. Godspeed. And I will see you soon. See you next week.